Good evening and welcome to the channel's studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5. 5 American citizens jailed for years in Iran have flown back to the US as part of a prisoner swap. The 4 men and 1 woman, who also hold Iranian passports, left Tehran by plane to Doha. Their release is dependent on the transfer of $6 billion in Iranian funds earned from selling oil to South Korea to banks in Doha, which is now said to have been completed. 5 Iranians imprisoned in the US are expected to be freed at the same time as part of the swap, which was mediated by Qatar. US President Joe Biden has long been urged to bring home Americans who have widely been seen as hostages used by Iran as bargaining chips. Confusion continues over the death toll from the disaster in Libya after the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs announced 11,300 dead and 10,100 missing in Derna. OCHA attributed the death toll to the Libyan Red Crescent, but its spokesman rejected the figures. In a later situation report, OCHA instead cited the World Health Organization figures of 3,958 people dead and more than 9,000 still missing. Russia has called on the International Court of Justice to throw out a case brought against it by Ukraine. Kyiv accuses Moscow of falsely using genocide law to justify its invasion.
Ukraine is not accusing Russia of committing genocide.
Russia maintains that it intervened in Ukraine to prevent a genocidal attack on ethnic Russians in the east. The court hearing in The Hague will not examine the legality of Russia's invasion, but will instead consider whether the International Court is allowed to examine Ukraine's claims. Ukraine says there was no risk of genocide in the east of the country, where it had been fighting Russian-backed forces since 2014. One of Sudan's main landmarks, a skyscraper that towered over the River Nile, has been reduced to a smouldering wreck amid heavy fighting between rival military factions in the capital. The Greater Nile Petroleum Operating Company head office, a glass-sided tower topped with a coil of metal, was built during an oil boom before South Sudan declared independence in 2011 and was one of Sudan's most costly constructions. It is unclear what caused the fire that burned through the tower. The RSF accused the army of targeting it along with other buildings amid efforts to dislodge paramilitary fighters from positions they occupied across the capital early in the conflict. China's top diplomat Wang Yi is visiting Russia for security talks as Moscow seeks continued support for its war in Ukraine. It comes after senior Chinese and US officials held multiple rounds of meetings in Malta over the weekend. A close ally of Moscow, Beijing is accused of supporting Russia indirectly during the war, something it denies. Wang Yi's visit comes after Vladimir Putin's meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un that was thought to yield an arms deal. Russian media said Mr. Wang's trip would also lay the ground for Mr. Putin to make a landmark visit to Beijing soon. An almost fully dinosaur skeleton will be sold at auction in Paris next month. The rare 150-million-year-old Camptosaurus was first discovered in the 1990s in the US by paleontologist Barry James. Named Barry after the man who found him in Wyoming, experts said he is extremely well preserved. The skeleton is expected to fetch up to $1.2 million, dating back to the late Jurassic period and after 2 restorations in 2000 and 2022. Barry measures 6.9 feet tall and 16.4 feet long. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the channel studios in Lagos.